Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon if you're on the East Coast, and welcome to Breakout Session B3, Feeding Neighborhoods, Feeding Hearts, the Transformative Power of Chefs, which I think is very important right now, and we're excited to have all of you. So I'll give you all just another couple seconds to trickle in here. I know we had a couple amazing Meet the Author booths, including with one of our panelists, JJ Johnson. So again, this is Breakout Session B3, Feeding Neighborhoods, Feeding Hearts, the Transformative Power of Chefs. And with that, I'll welcome our moderator for this panel, Melissa McCart, who is editor for Heated with Mark Bittman. Hi, Melissa.
Hello.
Take it away.
Thank you so much for joining us at Feeding Neighborhoods and Feeding Hearts. This is especially important to me. I feel like my career has been chronicling restaurants, and this has been a really hard time for restaurants, obviously, and for everyone. But to have access to chefs as they talk about how they're helping shape their communities is something that I'm really looking forward to facilitating as far as a conversation. First, I want to introduce Tracey Chang, the chef owner of Pagu. She's based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She's also a teaching fellow at Harvard's Science and Cooking program. She co-founded Off Their Plate, which is feeding healthcare workers through the pandemic. And it has expanded to 9 cities. And she's also founded Project Restore Us, which essentially allows for the packing and delivering of groceries for essential workers' families in low-income areas in Boston. In both situations, she's also keeping essential restaurant workers employed. Tracey, thanks for joining us. We also have JJ Johnson, who is the chef owner of Field Trip, and he has opened a new one this week, I believe. He's founded 2 nonprofits. One is the Buy a Bowl that's feeding essential healthcare workers in Harlem. And the second one is Harlem Grown, that's feeding the Harlem community that you also co-founded. Thanks for joining us, JJ. And Adrienne, our third panelist is Adrienne Lipscomb of La Crosse, Wisconsin, of Uptown Bakery and Cafe. She is, in addition to being a city planner and a mother of 4, she has recently launched the 40 Acres and a Mule project, which has raised over $130,000 so far, with the goal of preserving Black foodways. Thank you so much for joining us. This should be a super compelling conversation. Tracey, if we could start with you. I'm wondering if you could tell the people who have joined us a little bit about which of your nonprofits you launched first, and then a little bit of where you are now as we're looking at sort of COVID cases on the rise and how you're having to respond.
Great, thank you. Sure. So back in March, when COVID became a critical situation here in Boston, the governor mandated a shutdown around mid-March. And within 4 days, we launched Off Their Plate with one of our regulars, Natalie Guo. She was a regular, she was a Harvard Business School student, and then she was at the time a Harvard medical student. We decided to empower restaurants to feed frontline healthcare workers. And we realized that that was going to be, very quickly a huge need across the country. And we both had friends in other parts of the country that wanted to participate in what we were doing. So what we did was we ran a pilot of 90 meals to Brigham and Women. And with that pilot, I was able to understand from start to finish what was required of the restaurant. I was able to connect with friends in the area who specialized in medicine, in safety, and really put together standard operating procedures for how to do this safely. That was our greatest concern because we wanted to do the right thing, and that meant keeping everyone as safe as possible versus contributing to the spread of COVID. So very quickly, we were able to mobilize and just get volunteers all around the country, over 200 volunteers. We raised over $6 million. We were in 9 different cities. We transitioned into feeding communities in need when the need to feed healthcare workers slowly diminished in these cities, thankfully. We partnered with groups like World Central Kitchen to be able to feed more people, to be able to access more funding. And we wanted really to identify who these people were in terms of the communities in need, as well as who these restaurant owners were, the most vulnerable restaurant employees as well. And in doing so, in May, Irene Lee, Marina Lin, and Lily Huang and I, we also realized that these essential worker families were not able to receive food in various ways. Their kids were no longer in school. They were no longer employed. Maybe someone in the family had gotten COVID at some point. And that's how we decided to launch Project Restore Us. And what Project Restore Us does is it empowers restaurant workers to package groceries that are tailored to these communities in need. So these are Latinx, Haitian, Asian communities, all different kinds of communities. We tailor the boxes to exactly what they want to eat, what they're going to eat. We give them enough food that they can cook for the next 4 to 6 weeks. And we found that this really went, even further in terms of donor dollars, being able to reach more people in need, reach them safely, delivering door to door to their homes with volunteer drivers as we coordinated the logistics. And it really helped out restaurant essential workers who needed the employment and who needed to keep their jobs. So that is a project that we are still continuing to this day. We are still feeding folks. Yesterday, we packed up food for 69 families. And it's wonderful because these, how do we identify these communities in need, these families? We partner with existing mutual aid groups, existing community organizations who have been doing this for a while. But they haven't been doing, the food access part and the fundraising part and the logistics part per se. And so we kind of fill in those gaps, and we coordinate, the volunteer drivers. We find the restaurants that can repackage the foods, and we reach their people. And it's different from food banks because food banks, as I visited them as well, it's a lot of donated product. So it's actually not contributing per se to the supply chain. So our restaurant supply chain, has been hurting, but we are paying for these groceries. We are supporting our supply chains, supporting these farmers. The quality of the product that people are receiving is as good as we serve in the restaurant. And these are lasting, nutritious, culturally appropriate foods. The food banks, unfortunately, they're filled with Mountain Dew, Lucky Charms, grape jelly, just a lot of sugar. As we've noticed. And occasionally, they'll have some fresh donated bread. They'll have some, rice and beans and other dry goods. But we're really happy that we're able to provide and get these, kind of live feedback that the food is stretching further, the donor dollars are stretching further, and that people are happy to receive the food and to be able to cook it. So that's what we plan to do as COVID cases rise. We do not plan to do indoor dining. We've already shut down our patio. It's pretty much winter starting here in Boston. We had snow on Halloween last week. And, we hope that the community will continue to help us, continue to volunteer, and continue to donate, and just be aware that the food insecurity will continue for 18 to 24 months, even if there is a vaccine.
Thank you. JJ, if you talk to us a little bit about Viable and Harlem Grown, like where you started and where you are now.
So I just want to clear up two things. Tony Hillard is the founder of Harlem Grown. He just teamed up with us during the pandemic, and I'm just very active in the space. Harlem Grown actually is a hydroponic farm here in Harlem. It's one of the only hydroponic farms in the United States, similar farm that Winoma has and everything. But I'll give you a little bit of backstory about what we did. Probably right in February, we started to transition to feed frontline workers, and it was just because my wife came home and said, "Hey, did you make anything to eat? It's 1:30 in the morning." I said no, and she gave me the rundown that nurses they're getting killed and slaughtered. It's insane, and I sent her and her team some food. But I was like, what about locally in my community? What about Harlem Hospital? What about Metropolitan? What about Mount Sinai? So I went to Twitter, asked some people, anybody know anybody in the ER room at Harlem Hospital? Old general manager reached out to me, said my wife's in residency there. You could send over some food to her and her team. Dropped off 40 bowls. And when I dropped it off curbside. It was a very social distancing, like back up, don't come close moment. It was like, is everything okay? And, you hear about these things. Of course, my wife's giving me information, but I'm not there seeing it. And at that moment, I can feel it and see it. But it put a smile on that person's face when they took it. And I went to Twitter again and said, hey, I think I just did one of the best things in my life. And people started to say, I'll match you. I'll match 40 bowls. I'll do this. I'll do that. And that allowed for me at that time, we only had, at that time in the pandemic, it was myself, a manager, and 2 hourly employees that were working in Field Trip. I was probably working harder than any of my young cooking days. And Field Trip is my fast casual rice bowl shop right in the heart of Harlem. And when people started pouring in to do these donated to bowl program, we brought back staff slowly and slowly and slowly. And this was just something that we built out on our own in the donate the bowl area. And then through that, nonprofits started to reach out to us, the Edward Lee Foundation, Rethink, a lot of other players, partnerships that I had, MasterCard, Capital One. People started to reach out. Well, how can we help you do better? And I remember my wife coming maybe 3 months after and said, stop sending food to the hospital. We are literally throwing food away. And we turned to Harlem Grown. We turned to NYCHA, Boys and Girls Club, and started to feed their shelters and people in need, but also teamed up with our produce company. And I built a locally produce box that was getting handed out to residents, going back to Tracey, as the agricultural system was breaking down. The agricultural system is the foundation of our economy, and it's literally breaking down every day. So how can we also do that and help local farmers? And now we still feed. We're in partnership with Rethink out of the Harlem location. We do 200 meals a day, reheatable meals, 6 days a week. And everywhere that I open a Field Trip, we will constantly feed people in a pandemic, out of a pandemic. I sit on the board of the food bank in New York City, and the food banks can only do but so much. I'm not sure about the food banks in Boston. The food banks in New York City don't give out Mountain Dews or bread. They work really hard to give out real food to real people in need. And a lot of people think that the food banks are serving the homeless. Food banks are serving our neighbors, our family members, people that are giving their lunch money to their kids when they're in school. And we have, in this time, we've actually helped 2 food banks here in the Harlem area because they just can't keep up anymore as the lines are getting longer and longer. So we've been able to give them a couple days a week, 200 additional meals in both locations at a very break-even rate, at a reheatable model. So New York City Food Bank is a true backbone of New York City, and they partner with Baldor and a lot of great produce companies that we all order from as chefs to make sure people are getting real food to take home out of their pantry or when they're in the hot food line.
Thank you. And Adrienne, talk to us a little bit about your sort of momentum and your journey from when you were conceiving of this idea to when you launched, specifically the GoFundMe.
Yeah, so I own Uptown Cafe and Bakery in La Crosse, Wisconsin. So I'm in Wisconsin, so it's one of the hotbeds of COVID right now, and especially in my county. What was happening is that we went to a shelter in place, and our restaurant here is community based. In fact, we call it a community impact space. So we depend on the community. We built a relationship to become a fabric as part of the community. So before we even opened our door to open a restaurant, we had like a 4-day session where we brought in city planners and people from economic development, from public spaces, to kind of talk to the community about what they wanted for their community, what was their voice, what was the identity of this community. And when we came all together, we developed a packet and went to the city and said, hey, this is what our community wants to be. So we had a very big and strong backbone with the community here in La Crosse. So when COVID hit, it was pretty shocking. And as restaurants were closing or we were in shelter in place, a lot of our community reached out to us to figure out what to do and how they were doing it. And it was a weird phenomenon is that they were sending money. And they were doing either two things. They would buy gift cards and then they would put it in my name to give it right back to the restaurant, or they were literally snail mailing money to us. So they were sending, they would send us checks or they would send cash and they would just have my name on it, and they would either come and put it in our mailbox or they would mail it to us. I didn't know exactly why people were sending us money. I didn't know if they understood if we were even hurting. I mean, at the time we were great. We sat down and had this conversation going, are we in trouble? And when we looked at our books, we were completely 100% paid. All our vendors are paid. We were farm to table. So every time a farmer comes and would drop off, they would take a check with them. So we didn't have that problem. We started questioning, why did we stay open? And it was because of our employees. We wanted to make sure that they were still capable and they were having a job. So when we started getting money, we were like, what do we do with this? We can't just accept it. And I kind of slept on it. And the next morning I woke up and I said, what about our farmers? How are our farmers doing? Because at the peak time that we were shutting down and restaurants were no longer distributing, or getting food from farmers, was at their peak point where they were just, they had already threw down their seed. They were gambling on what the summer was going to bring for them. But then I started looking at the diversity in my area. In Wisconsin, there's over 65,000 farmers, but only 65 of them identify as Black. And in my county, we have none. And I said, you know what we're going to do? I said, we're going to put this towards preserving Black foodways, and we're going to put this towards owning Black land and trying to rediscover the history of what was happening within this area in the Midwest. From then, it was literally within 24 hours, we developed a GoFundMe, and we really dived into that preservation of Black agriculture because of the food chain supply is crumbling. It still is. It's still having problems. But when you look at farmers in the United States, Black farmers only estimated up to less than 2%. And if you're thinking about what's happening during COVID in these 2% of Black farmers, that we're talking rural farmers, not urban farmers, rural farmers, there's a highly good chance that they're going to lose their farm. So we started developing, looking at the history, the relationship, where is their legacy? A majority is over 65 in age. We started reaching out to farmers, starting having discussions to see where were they and what were they needing? Because at this time, USDA had put a COVID package out, but a majority of the Black farmers that we spoke to and a majority of Black farmers and other organizations did not know about that COVID relief packet. So they missed out on that money because the USDA had already shut it down because they had so many people in need for that funding. So at this moment, our determination was to develop a program, especially during COVID, and which was so unique because social media wise and internet wise has been the greatest connection to bringing people together to have more serious conversations, and kind of clears out the fray when you start talking about certain areas within agriculture and farming, but also how does it come from the soil to your plate. And so at this moment, we have already bought one property, and in fact, we're looking at 3 other properties around it that we may be getting, and then we're still and that's in South Carolina. So right now in the Midwest, we are working with organizations to adapt more than one property, so more than 40 acres. I didn't know that this project was going to get as big as it has gotten, and it's still developing more. But the outreach from just my community alone has been amazing, but also the hospitality community, because they understand where their food comes from and how important it is on an agricultural standpoint, how we need these farmers. So it has been one of the most amazing rides. And, like others were saying, like during COVID, I feel like I have been the busiest I've ever been.
Wow. I'd like whoever wants to answer this first can respond. But here's my question to you about staff. You're saying that you are at various versions of health when COVID began. And I'm just wondering, can you talk us through how you're able to keep staff, or if you had to cut staff, or how staff balances working for the nonprofit versus working for like your regular customers, for example? I think a lot of people are bringing to the table the idea that restaurant workers are struggling and that restaurants are having to cut staff. And so talk to us a little bit about how you manage that, or if that's in fact true in your cases.
I mean, I can go. My staffs are mainly where our servers are our front of house staff. We were able to keep 100% of our back of house staff with no problem. Our front of house staff was completely different because we had a lot that were in college. So some of them decided to go back home and go back home to their parents, because college wasn't, at the time, was just virtual, and then for them to be able to save money. Other than that, we have been able to keep all of our staff, even our high school staff, we have been able to keep on board. And in fact, with more hours, and as the winter is coming up, we are even looking to hiring more staff because we already see the precedence of some of the need that we're going to need. That was my main concern, because like in Boston, you got snow, you got our snow we were supposed to get on Halloween, but we know that our winters are turning around and it's going to be a lot worse. And we haven't closed the entire time during COVID. We've been open 100% of the time, but we closed down the front of house. So you were not allowed into our space for a long period of time until we felt comfortable and our staff felt comfortable enough to open our doors to allow people in. And that happened around the mask mandate. We were already mandating for them to have masks. We had already shut down. Before shelter in place, we had already closed our doors and we were only doing takeout and delivery. So we just kind of already flipped the model because we saw what other states were doing and we knew it was going to head our way. So we've kind of been at least a week or 2 weeks ahead of everybody in the state.
Thank you. JJ, when I talked to you individually, you talked a little bit about how you started with a much smaller staff and you're growing, obviously, because you're opening other locations. Talk to me a little bit about your employees' roles and how they've changed through COVID, and how that affects your relationship with your community.
Yeah, I mean, just from the start, kind of like Adrian talks about, we're a community-driven restaurant. It starts by who do we hire, and most of the staff is from Harlem or Upper Manhattan. And that was very beneficial through COVID because they would walk to work, they could come in very easy, right? There wasn't a lot of they were able to social distance. But when sales started to creep down 30, 40, 50%, I had to have those hard conversations with my staff members. Hey, you're going to get cut by 30, you're going to get cut by 40, you're going to get cut by 50%. And I remember Iris saying, hey, I'm part-time. You don't need to give me 10 hours a week now. Why don't you give those 10 hours to Kira? I have a family at home. My husband's still working. And when you need me, I'll come back. And the team here has been the same team from the beginning. And they all really look after each other. And that's what happened through a lot of this, as all of them started to really say, don't give my hours to somebody else because I know they need it. Or I got my hours last week. Why don't you give Shay her hours this week? And that was very beneficial, but also made it very easier for me as an owner to make sure that people, like, nobody was feeling like I was playing favorites. And then as we picked up, everybody came back, and now I have more staff at the Harlem location, more than before. And then when all 3 restaurants are opening up, we'll have in total about 30 staff members.
Wow, that's incredible. Tracey, when we were talking a little bit, you were talking about the specifically sort of packing groceries to distribute to low income parts of Boston. How do you navigate the roles in the restaurant versus the roles in nonprofit work?
Yeah, so everyone in our restaurant participates in kind of front and back of the house activities now. There's way more cross-training than there was before. We're obviously a smaller crew than before. To give you an idea of numbers, we went from 36 employees. Of those 36 employees, about 28 were full-time. And we went down to about 8 employees when COVID first started. And we've been anywhere between 8 to 12 to 4. I think we're around 6 employees right now. And we've just had open conversations about it because of those original 36 employees, 28 of them were Latinx. So over 80% were Latinx employees. And we're unable to collect unemployment. Thankfully, we're in Cambridge, Massachusetts, so there were a couple of opportunities provided by the city to apply for grants to aid our employees. Even though they didn't live in Cambridge, they did work in Cambridge full time. And so we were able to get some aid for them early on, $600 to $900 for all those employees that we filed applications for. Which they recently told me, they're like, yeah, you and one other restaurant, you guys really went out of the way to apply for your employees. And I mean, I was lucky that, a friend turned me on to it, and I just got to filling out applications. So what we've also done is we've instituted a 20% service charge. That service charge goes directly to these employees. What it helps with is, preventing folks from leaving a 10% or 15% tip. And occasionally we do get, some kind of pushback, but we explain to folks very clearly that, these are COVID times, and we are, needing to provide a livable wage for our employees and provide safety and PPE. In addition to that, we only carpool to work. So because we are a tight-knit team and we are reducing any kind of exposure, all of the employees have access to groceries, to any kind of first aid, pharmacy needs here, and no one takes public transportation, and everyone makes enough that they don't need to have a second job, a third job. And so that exposure is crucial. And I think, like I said earlier, in terms of how do you create a scalable model that works in other cities? If you do every single step from start to finish, you're going to kind of figure out how to write the recipe for it and how to empower other chefs to do the same. So I decided if I'm going to understand these communities in need that we're feeding, that are low income, high COVID areas, these are where my employees live. This is, Chelsea, Everett, East Boston, Dorchester, Mattapan, in Massachusetts. And so, I've been driving through those areas. I've been doing the deliveries. I pick up my employees and drop them off every day. It makes us a closer family, and also just, we understand the pandemic a lot better. I think, like JJ said, his wife is a nurse in the ER, and we also got similar messages coming from healthcare side saying, hey, we got enough food, please send this to other communities in need. And I'm really glad that people said that to us, because it made us seek out, those communities in need, which, if you kind of run the loop, it goes back to our own employees and their neighbors and their families. So it's really nice to be feeding, these essential worker families who have done so much for our industry.
Absolutely. I'm looking to the screen. Karen Page asked a question. She said, just curious from a flavor perspective, what you might have discovered to be the most accessible, crowd-friendly bowls/meals during the pandemic. Did you have to take into account other considerations besides nutrition, like vegetarianism or gluten-free? And how did you roll that in, JJ?
For us, we give you exactly what's on our menu. We haven't altered our menu at all. Mixture. We give vegetarian, vegan, seafood. We do stay away from seeds and nuts because some people don't know that they have those allergies, such as seed allergy. So we give the same amount of food, the same bowl, the same product that we give to somebody that comes in to buy food in our restaurant. But we are real conscious of that, and especially working with Rethink. It very big for me is I want to make sure that we're feeding Harlem, that our food isn't going to another community. And it's very interesting when the drivers pick up the food in the morning and put it on the refrigerated truck. They say, people will ask them, where's the food coming from? And they'll say, oh, it's coming from right down the street, field trip. And today is shrimp. And people get really excited about that, or they'll stop by to thank us. Or vegetarians and vegans come by all the time to thank us that, thank you for thinking about us. That today wasn't pork or beef or chicken. So we're really cautious about that because we know people have those dietary restrictions.
Sure. Adrian, did you decide to abbreviate your menu or tweak your menu at all as COVID was coming? Or did you find that you could essentially keep your menu as is?
We did change a couple things, especially off our breakfast menu. We were really huge on breakfast and brunch, and it was all about how does it carry? Is it going, like the containers, how is it going to carry? Is it going to stay warm when we drop food off, or when food is carried out? Is it sustainable? Does it look good in the container also? Like, will people identify what is happening in your food? I mean, a lot of our food in our base is vegetarian. So from there, they can build up and add different proteins to their food. It makes it a lot easier. A lot of our dishes are gluten-free. So it makes it easier for them if people want to add something else, that they're able to build up to it. We thought that was going to be the easiest base for us, because some people just want to eat healthy, and some people want fried chicken and they want to add chicken to it. So for us, it was a lot easier. Some of our staples that don't carry very well, we did have to take off. And then sometimes we just had to be very creative and inventive in deciding what we can do with our menu.
We have a few more minutes left, and I'm wondering if you could keep the answer brief. I'm just curious, what is your dream for your efforts in helping the community? What in 2 years or in 5 years, what would you hope to see, or how would you hope to see this progress? Tracey.
Yeah, I mean, I think people, in terms of food insecurity, would like to say that they'd be out of business, right? And they've probably been saying that for years. And I think, given COVID and the recession that we're in, and kind of what's to come, the food insecurity will be longer lasting and will require the help of restaurants and other folks who probably in their 20s, 30s, 40s didn't imagine that they would be doing nonprofit work. I know myself, I always thought, all right, in my 50s, 60s, like when I want to be a mentor to others, like I'll do this kind of nonprofit work. And I mean, I think it's a blessing in disguise. I'm, glad we got the kind of opportunity to step up to the plate now and to do it. And I really hope that on the legislation side of things, that there's less kind of red tape, that we can, activate restaurants and really continue to do this line of work because it will be needed. And I think that will be the kind of new normal. But in order to do that, there needs to be access to funding. There needs to be, ability to serve government groups like Boston Public Schools. I was on a call with them. I'm trying to figure out how to help them serve their students. And it seemed like the major challenge was just a lot of red tape. They had the funding, they had the people, they had the places, we had the logistics and kind of know-how. And it was, I think, back in July that they hadn't yet fed over 50% of their students. And so, I hope that changes, because this should be an example that restaurants and chefs, we are quick to adapt and we're quick to feed people.
Sure.
But World Central Kitchen as well. So hopefully, less tape and we can help feed more people.
Thank you. JJ, you had mentioned that you were in DC talking a little bit about the restaurant industry and communities in need. If in 5 years from now, what would you hope would be the relationship between restaurants and their communities, particularly people who need help?
Yeah, I was talking on Capitol Hill last Friday on a similar Zoom like this, congressional leaders. I think when we look at restaurants in this time, when the pandemic first started, everybody looked at restaurants as a luxury, right? Especially our current administration, right? They looked at us like, this is a luxury. You get investors, and if you're open, you're able to stay open, great. And if you close, you ran a bad business. But the restaurants are this glue in the community, right? They make sure the streets stay clean. They make sure the crime level gets low. They make sure the agricultural system runs. They employ a lot of people, not just in our direct industry. Without us, there's a lot of other industries that collapse. And I think through this pandemic, Adrian, Tracey, we've shown that restaurants are a necessity, right? We're part of this movement of the true ending of hunger, the true ending of nutritional values that need to perceive and how people eat. And that I think that's really important. And that's the future of what a restaurant looks like. Yes, you'll be open for people that can come through the doors and eat food and have a great time. But behind the scenes, restaurants will also be feeding people that need a meal that just can't afford to eat in the restaurant. And it will be something super delicious, right? And they might work with a nonprofit. They might steer how farmers are getting their food out. But restaurant owners, chefs, restaurateurs are going to be a big part of that. And if our future administration, don't step up to do that, we'll just keep doing the work ourselves. Because if I was as big as Chipotle, I would be giving people one burrito at a time through the pandemic. And I hope that as I expand Field Trip and in these really hard times, we're going to be able to give one rice bowl at a time the next year, the next 2 years, the next 5 years. And I know our peers that are watching will do the same or step up to make sure that we can feed people.
Thank you all so much. This was an amazing panel and very uplifting. I think maybe a silver lining of what's currently happening in the pandemic. So don't go anywhere. I just wanted to give a couple quick highlights of what everybody can expect coming up in the reception tonight and tomorrow in our final day as we wrap up WOOF. So tonight at 5 p.m., We've got a reception, which is going to include a Spanish wine and food pairing discussion, a flamenco presentation, several student demonstrations and presentations. We've got a recommended cocktail recipe that you can prepare to have, next to you while you're going through all this. A couple market tours in Bangkok and Singapore, and that's just naming a couple things. So I think you're going to want to be there. That's at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. And tomorrow we also have a cook along. Don't forget that you will want to make your dough tonight if you're going to participate, and I will put the recipes in the chat here before everybody leaves. And now, just to wrap up, I've got a quick question for our panelists. So if the audience were to remember only one thing about your appearance from today, what would you want it to be? And we could start with anybody.
I guess I'll say, leading off of what JJ was saying, that the definition of restaurants is going to change, and restaurants are not going to be the same as they were pre-COVID. You're going to see that these restaurants, but also their owners, will be stepping up to be more for our community, but more just across the world.
Katie, what's the question? Say that one more time.
Yeah, if you have like a one-liner top takeaway from today's discussion, what would it be?
Restaurants are necessities, not luxuries.
Yeah, the etymology of the word restaurant is to restore. So hopefully we can restore what's needed to our communities, and that's the basic necessities of everyday life, which is the right to eat, right? The right to have food. And so, you don't have to be a restaurant person or a restaurant owner or celebrity chef to help restore these communities. You can get involved, you can donate, you can volunteer drive, you can help fundraise. There's a lot of different ways to get involved. So please check out what your community needs and get involved.
Melissa, you want to wrap us up?
Sure. I thank you so much for attending. I'm wondering if there's some place that if people who are here listening want to donate, if we can tell them where to go, if we can go to Adrian's GoFundMe, where can we go if we want to open up our wallets now?
Yeah, and you can all put it in the chat. If you have a specific link to somewhere, drop it in there for attendees for quick access.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all so much. It was a great panel. Great chatting with you all. And for those that'll be joining us tonight, we'll see you at 5 o'clock Pacific or 8 o'clock Eastern, and I will put some recipes in the chat here for your reference. Thanks so much.